Paris, France, 1990. The set of Dancing Machine. Alain Delon, 54 years old, stood under studio lights that had become cruelly honest with each passing year. A young assistant director, 26, fresh from film school, looked at the monitor and said what everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to say out loud. "You're too old for this role." The 5 minutes that followed would redefine what aging means in cinema. The production had been troubled from the beginning. Dancing Machine was supposed to be Alain Delon's comeback vehicle, a stylish thriller about an aging hitman forced to take one final job that would either redeem him or destroy him completely. The script was solid, written by a respected screenwriter who understood character. The director, Gilles Bahat, was competent and experienced. Having worked on French thrillers, the budget was adequate for what they were trying to accomplish. But there was one fundamental problem that nobody wanted to address directly. The kind of problem that hangs over a production like smoke, visible to everyone, but discussed by no one. Alain Delon looked his age, not in a dignified way, in a tired, weathered way. The face that had launched 1,000 magazine covers, that had defined masculine beauty, now carried lines that makeup couldn't fully hide, creases that told stories of cigarettes and cognac, and decades under harsh lights. The body that had moved like a predatory cat through the streets of 1960s Paris now moved like a man who'd lived hard and paid the biological price. The camera was now ruthlessly, unforgivingly honest. They were shooting a chase scene through the narrow streets of the Marais district. Delon's character, a former assassin named Claude, was supposed to pursue a target through the medieval quarter, moving with lethal efficiency. The choreography called for running, jumping over obstacles, vaulting a low wall, maintaining a sprint for 3 minutes. The first take lasted exactly 40 seconds before Delon stopped, hands on his knees, breathing heavily, his face flushed, despite the cool October morning. Cut. Everyone froze. The script supervisor looked down. The cinematographer suddenly found his lens very interesting. The stunt coordinator shifted his weight uncomfortably. Reset. Let's go again. Take 2. Action. This time Delon made it 55 seconds before the same thing happened. His breath coming in ragged gasps, his hair damp with sweat. The crew exchanged uncomfortable glances, not judgmental, just uncomfortable, sad even. The makeup artist rushed in quickly with powder, trying to hide the flush in Delon's cheeks. The wardrobe assistant brought a fresh shirt. The director called for a 20-minute break that stretched to 45. Take 7, take 12, take 18, each one ending the same way. Delon out of breath, frustrated, visibly angry at his own body for betraying him, for making him look weak in front of 100 people who'd grown up watching him be invincible. The assistant director, a young man named Marc Dubois, stood behind the bank of monitors in the video village. He was 26 years old, born the year Delon made The Samurai. Raised on French New Wave cinema, Le Samouraï had fundamentally changed his understanding of what movies could be. Plein Soleil had made him want to become a filmmaker. Rocco and his brothers had taught him that cinema could break your heart. But the man struggling on that monitor wasn't the legend from those films. He was an aging actor trying to do something his body couldn't handle. During a break, while Delon sat in his chair, gulping water, still breathing heavily, Dubois made the mistake that would define both their careers. He turned to the director and said, too loudly, "Maybe we should completely rewrite the scene, make it less physically demanding. I mean, he's clearly too old for this kind of action." He didn't realize that Alain Delon was standing 3 feet directly behind him, close enough to hear. The set went completely silent. 50 people stopped what they were doing simultaneously. The sound mixer pulled off his headphones. The boom operator lowered his pole. The extras, who'd been chatting quietly in the background, all turned to look. Everyone's eyes found Delon. He stood there motionless, still wearing the costume that was now damp with sweat, his makeup beginning to run slightly at the temples, his breathing still elevated from the last failed take. His face was completely unreadable, not angry, not hurt, not embarrassed, just very, very still, like a predator that's just noticed something interesting. Marc Dubois turned around, saw Delon standing there. His face went absolutely white. "Oh God, Monsieur Delon, I wasn't." The moment stretched out like pulled taffy. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the distant traffic from Rue de France-Bourgeois and the soft hum of the generator trucks. Then Alain Delon did something nobody expected. He smiled, not a warm smile, not a friendly smile, not even an angry smile. A cold, calculating, dangerous smile that belonged to every lethal character he'd ever played. The smile of someone who'd just decided exactly how this was going to go. "You think I'm too old for this role?" It wasn't a question. It was a flat statement. Dubois stammered. "I mean the scene, the way it's written, the physical demands. I just thought maybe." Delon raised one hand. "Stop talking." The smile vanished instantly. Now he just looked tired. Real tired. Bone tired. "You're right. I am too old for this scene as currently written, for this kind of sustained physical action. I am too old. My body can't do what it could do 20 years ago. I can't run for 3 minutes without getting winded. I can't jump obstacles without worrying about my knees. I can't move like I'm 30 years old." He walked closer to Dubois. Dubois took a small step back. "Because I'm not 30. I'm 54 years old. And that's not the problem. The problem is that you're trying to direct me like I'm still 30. You're using a 30-year-old's playbook on a 54-year-old's body. And that's not just bad direction. That's lazy filmmaking." Dubois opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out except a small sound that might have been the beginning of a word. "Let me tell you something about age that nobody in film school teaches you." Delon's voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire set. "When you're young and beautiful, the camera does 90% of the work for you. You show up, you hit your mark, you say your lines, and the audience fills in everything else. They see what they want to see: youth, energy, potential, danger." He gestured to himself, to the sweat-stained costume, the running makeup, the graying hair. "This body, this face, can't do that anymore. The camera sees everything now, every line, every weakness, every year, because now I actually have to act. Now I have to make you believe in this character, not because he looks dangerous, but because he is dangerous. Not because he moves fast, but because he moves smart. Not because he's young and strong, but because he's old and experienced. And that's infinitely more threatening." He turned to the director. "Gilles, bring me the script. Right now." The director grabbed the script and brought it to Delon. Delon flipped through pages until he found the chase scene. "This scene, as currently written, it's a young man's scene. Run fast, jump high, catch the target, subdue him. That's not interesting. That's just athletics. That's just athletics." He closed the script and tossed it back to the director. "Here's what's actually interesting. A man who knows he can't run anymore. A man who has to think 3 moves ahead because his body won't bail him out if he makes a mistake. A man who uses 40 years of experience and knowledge of these streets instead of speed and strength. That's character. That's tension. That's the movie we should be making." The set remained absolutely silent. Delon wasn't finished. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to completely reshoot this chase sequence. Not with me running like a young man. With me walking, thinking, planning, using the streets to stay ahead of a younger target. And if you shoot it correctly, if you understand what you're filming, it will be 10 times more tense than any chase scene I did when I was 30. Because now there are real stakes. He doesn't have youth and speed to fall back on. All he has is experience, and intelligence, and the willingness to use both ruthlessly. Gilles Behat stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, almost wonderingly, he nodded. That's actually brilliant. That changes everything. Delon turned back to Marc Dubois, who still looked like he might throw up. You said I'm too old. You're absolutely right. But old doesn't mean obsolete. Old doesn't mean finished. Old doesn't mean weak. It means different. And different, when used intelligently, is always more interesting than generic. You need to learn the difference. They completely reset the scene. Same location, same setup, but different approach. This time, when action was called, Delon didn't run. He walked, deliberately, calmly, efficiently, while the target ran panicked through the narrow streets, making noise, drawing attention, wasting energy. Delon simply walked, taking shortcuts the runner didn't know existed, using shortcuts to stay ahead. When they converged at the kill point, the target was winded, panicked, making mistakes, vulnerable. Delon was calm, controlled, his breathing steady, inevitable, as death itself. Cut, print. The entire crew burst into spontaneous applause, real, sustained, genuine applause, because they'd just watched something fundamental shift. They'd watched limitation become power. Gilles Behat walked over to Delon. That was absolutely perfect. That was better than anything I had in my head when we started this morning. Delon didn't smile, didn't celebrate, just nodded once. That night, after the crew had left, Marc Dubois found Delon in his trailer. Delon was sitting quietly, having a scotch. Dubois knocked on the open door. Monsieur Delon, I need to apologize for what I said, for what you heard. For what? For telling the truth. Dubois stepped inside, hesitantly. I didn't mean it as an insult. I know you didn't. You meant it as a problem, a production problem that needed solving. But problems are just opportunities, waiting to be reframed. Dubois sat down carefully on the small couch. How do you actually do that? How do you do that? Delon took a sip of his drink. I don't turn weakness into strength. I turn limitation into specificity. Being young is general, universal. Any young person can run and jump, and fight. Being old is specific. Only I can be 54 years old, with this particular face, and this particular history, and this particular body. That specificity is what makes it interesting. That's what makes it worth filming. But doesn't it bother you, losing what you had? The youth? The physical ability? Every single day, every day, I'm reminded of what I've lost. Yes, it bothers me. But you know what would bother me more? Pretending I still have it. Lying to the camera. Lying to the audience. Lying to myself. The only thing worse is pretending you're still young. Dancing Machine was released to theaters 6 months later. Critics and reviewers were sharply divided. Some critics said,
Jeff.
Delon was clearly past his prime and should retire. Others said he'd found an entirely new prime, that his performance had a weight and intelligence his earlier work had lacked. The chase scene became iconic in film schools, not as an action sequence, as a masterclass in turning physical limitation into character depth. 10 years later, in 2000, Marc Dubois directed his first feature film. He cast a 62-year-old actor in a lead role that had been originally written for a man in his 40s. When journalists asked him why he'd made such an unusual choice, he said simply, because Alain Delon personally taught me that age isn't a limitation, it's a specification, and specific is always more interesting than general. 20 years after that difficult shoot, someone interviewed Alain Delon about Dancing Machine. Do you remember the chase scene? The one where you changed everything? Yes, I remember it very clearly. Do you remember what the young assistant director said to you?
Yeah, that I was too old for the role.
That I couldn't handle it. That must have been absolutely devastating to hear. Delon smiled, a real smile this time. with actual warmth in it. No, it was actually the most useful thing anyone said to me in that entire decade, because he was completely right. And him being right forced me to stop pretending and start thinking. It forced me to be better, to be smarter, to actually use my craft instead of my face. The interviewer pressed the question further. But surely you could have just accepted smaller role, less demanding parts, things that would have been easier. Delon's smile faded. I honestly don't know how to do easy. I never learned that particular skill. I only know how to do specific, to be exactly what I am in this exact moment, with complete honesty. And at 54, with this particular body, and this particular face, and this particular history, I could be more specific than I'd ever been in my life. That's not settling. That's evolution. Paris, 1990. One very young assistant director. One uncomfortable truth, spoken out loud. 5 crucial minutes that changed how an icon understood his own value and redefined what aging means in cinema. Because youth is universal and completely common. Everyone has it once in their life. But age, real honest age, honestly acknowledged and intelligently used, is utterly singular and completely unique. And singular always beats universal in art. Every single time, always without exception.